Let's review the agenda. I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda for tonight. We have our first and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Abstentions? Motion carries. Does anyone have any comments on the meeting minutes from January 31, 2023? They were sent out before and they're in your packet also. If there's no comments, I'll accept a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 31, 2023.
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second? First and second. Any abstentions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And then Lori or NJ, any public comment tonight?
We do have one person signed up for public comment.
Wonderful. If
Free
you
to
want to
join the table.
please state your name.
Check. I'm Bart Hafman.
Bart.
How you guys doing? I'm glad you guys have a microphone here. I'm not a loud talker, contrary to public opinion, but Tina, my wife, and I are here to, we're the owners of 51600 Southeast 9th Street in Scappoose here, kind of known as the Lake House. And I don't even know if I'm at the right meeting for this, or I'm too early or not, but I was just hoping we might be able to be considered for urban growth boundary. We're trying all different options for our property right now. We're actually talking with the county. It's in county and it's agriculture zoned, although it's rather low acreage. It's like just over 4 acres, and there's like an existing lake there, and 3 structures that are, pretty sizable with a nice wraparound driveway. And then there's the field, which looks awesome, but it's actually a septic drain field. And it's a repair field, so there's not really a lot we can do with that. Certain attractiveness of being in the urban growth boundary from our standpoint would be being on septic and having access to city water. The well is working fine for now, but if there's a couple showers going, you kind of notice it goes, starts to come down a little bit, and then the daunting thing that goes over your head: what if this septic drain field fails? So those are a couple things to be considered there. What also plays into it, I just heard that there's, got her name, but she told me that there was kind of a pretty strict guideline of what gets let into the urban growth boundary, and apparently not really in the color zoning of what that is. But what we can bring to the table that we're working with the county on right now, but we don't know where it's going to go, is there's a lot of people who want us to continue the operations of what we've been providing in the community as far as the lake house goes. Public fundraisers, stuff for the wrestlers. It's been a place where people can kind of come out and have a nice wedding. Our sweet spot is between 20 and 60 people, I would say. We're trying to keep numbers low, but provide a service. What piqued me about being in the urban growth boundary is recently the Scappoose firefighters rented it for their annual gala, and they had a really great time that night. I wasn't there, but I just texted off the lead guy who sent me a message. He's like, dude, it was awesome. We had a great time. And I got cited for that event, which is fine. I didn't want to cancel it on them because they gave me a cease and desist order like a week before it. And I didn't want them to have to find another place to have it. And I just thought, if I get cited, I'll suck it up and I'll just deal with it. And but it really let me know that the city itself wants to use the place. And if the city wants to use the place, I want to do what I can to try to make that happen. So I think getting led into urban growth would provide a little bit more potential for that to happen on a city-wise basis. So there's several reasons, but like I said, it's not live or die on any side of the coin right now. I'm just like throwing things out there and seeing what might be the path that we choose to take. But certainly I thought, don't know if I'm at the right meeting at the right time or not, but I just wanted to let you guys know what we're thinking.
Thank you for coming, Bart. Is there another meeting or how would he approach that urban growth boundary ask?
This is
City
something
council
we'll
or-
just be starting to go through. Beth can sort of speak to that once we get to that portion of the presentation tonight. I would say this is just as fine a meeting as any, would you say?
It's early, but it's a fine meeting to make the ask, certainly.
And I understand that like we don't have any property to like expand into a subdivision, and that's usually why, you know, tax dollars and expand out this direction. I get that, but I do believe that the houses that are coming here that we can add value to the community, and people can look at it and go like, "That's a really cool place to go." We could have like potential with the right you'd have to get the right permits to do it, but like ladies wine and paint nights. We could be doing things like throughout the summer, providing like a musical camp, just like a day camp, which would be kind of cool. You know, you got a lot of kids around here looking for things to do. And being a multi-instrumentalist, I mean, one of my things that I've always wanted to do is have like, like maybe 3 days of like piano camp, 3 days of guitar camp or bass guitar camp, and then, you know, get kids thinking like I did back in the 80s, where I was at home practicing my musical instrument rather than just on my phone all the time. So I think that there's some community benefits that could happen there. So
So Bart, as I understand, you have an event place, and I've been to it many times. It's lovely. Thank you.
yeah.
You're not zoned, correct?
Yeah, it's zoned agriculture. And so the county, I don't think they haven't been very helpful. And I don't think they're supposed to be very helpful, is what I found out. I haven't done a lot of this stuff, but I think you're supposed to find your own way and do your own, research and all this stuff. But so we're trying the avenue of a conditional use permit now, and we're going to put in for that. And if it gets shot down, that's probably our last avenue with the county. The zone change seemed like it was just going to cost like, I already put $5,000 into it, and it just seemed like a dead end street. So I could see, $50,000 later, and they could still say, nope. And some of it might be out of the county's hands. It might be on a state level at that point. But having it come into the UGB, I think changes, and you might know more about this than I do, but I think it changes the dynamic of all that. I think it regains some control back locally here of if the city really wants this. One of my neighbors put up a petition when she heard I got cited online, and she's like, "We need the lake house here." And like 1,000 people signed it in 3 days. And some of those people are outside the community. A lot were inside the community who have been at events like you've been to before. So we're a small little business that employs about 9 people, or 9 other different businesses in town, like Wild Current Catering, Wild Current Catering, the bakery in town, a wedding planner, a DJ, a photographer, all those different people. And so if we capture money for like a real paying event, it stays in town. So lots of things to, I think I've said enough.
Thank you, Bart.
much.
Thank you for sharing tonight. Thank you.
Right.
And I'll turn it over to you, Lori, for a review of the project to date.
All right. Well, thank you all. It's been quite some time since we've gotten together. So thank you all for being here. So what I wanted to do is just provide sort of an overview tonight for you of the project, just to get everybody back on the same page. And so I'm going to go over sort of how this got started, what we've accomplished to date, what we have left to do, and then what the end goal of the project is, just to kind of put it into a frame of reference for you. So the 50-year plan concept started as a council goal. And the reason was so that the city would have that long look into the future to know where the city would grow over the next 50 years. So this is very much a land use focused plan. And in order to be able to look that far into the future and know what our land needs are for different types of uses and what the community envisions for the future of Scappoose, we started out with a number of different priorities. And the first one was community outreach. And so with the help of you, our committee members and other city committees and staff, we reached out to the community. You might recall with the Community Conversations Kit, which was put together by Anais. We reached out to the citizens at the annual town meeting, at Venture Fest, at the farmers market, and we also did an online survey. And that was in order to better understand the community's vision and priorities related to future growth here in Scappoose. So those initial outreach efforts led to the drafting of a vision statement for this 50-year plan project. That vision statement is going to help inform comp plan policies that the committee will be discussing later this year, as well as complementing the technical work of those initial studies that we completed once the vision statement was done. So I see the vision statement sort of as the thread that sort of ties this all together. So the next step in the project was to complete an updated housing capacity analysis. Those are previously called a housing needs analysis. You probably remember that term a little more than the other capacity analysis. So the city was awarded a grant to complete that part of the project. That's why we had two different consultant teams in the beginning. We had MIG, APG, and they were provided by the state as part of that grant to do the housing capacity analysis work. The remaining part of the work will be completed by Echo Northwest, and who's the primary consultant on the project, and then 3J, who's working as a sub under Echo Northwest. The housing capacity analysis was a necessary part of the project, since that is the data that's needed in order to develop a forecast about how much land is needed for housing over the next 20 years. And that's to meet statutory requirements for our city's current UGB. And then projected out another 30 years to see what our land needs are over a 50-year horizon. And that ties directly to the establishment of urban reserves, and that's for the 20 to 50-year period.
That could be any more confusing than it is.
It is just one builds on the next. Once the land needs through the housing capacity analysis was established, Echo Northwest started work on the economic opportunities analysis. That's going to look at employment land needs. So just as the housing capacity analysis looked at the land need for housing, the economic opportunities analysis forecasts employment land need. Again, this study was absolutely necessary so that we could use the data from these two reports to look at a potential UGB expansion, urban growth boundary expansion, that is. And that's to meet our 20-year supply, as well as looking out that additional 30 years to establish urban reserves to meet our 50-year land need. Both studies, again, are required by the state so that the 20-year supply of land is available for growth within the urban growth boundary. But it was because of the original council goal, though, that the city chose to extend that to look out another 30 years to get our 50-year land needs and to establish urban reserves. The next major effort of the project is where we are now. So we have those two studies done. As well as looking at other types of land needs. And so now we're going to start working through development code updates, comprehensive plan policies, and start a discussion tonight actually about urban growth boundary and urban reserves analysis. So this particular part of the project is going to take us through the end of this year and into next year, which Beth is going to touch on here in just a bit. So the project as a whole is expected to wrap up next fall to winter, when we will take this information to the Planning Commission, who will then make a recommendation to the City Council for adoption of these individual components, the housing capacity analysis, the economic opportunities analysis, the comp plan and development code amendments, potential rezones, and likely a UGB expansion and establishment of urban reserves. So the 50-year plan it's really made up of these individual land use documents and components to be adopted by City Council. Although we will have an actual 50-year plan document that touches on all the components that went into the work and summarizes the project as a whole. That's what we get at the end. So the individual components, as I mentioned, the housing capacity analysis, economic opportunities analysis, and the comp plan, they're really living documents. They're going to be updated over time as things change or just as time passes in general to keep them current and reflective of what's happening in the community. Because we all know that the one constant in life is change. Nothing's just going to stay the same. So those are documents that will get updated over time. But the overall goal of this effort is to make sure that the city is looking into the future, 50 years into the future, and making sure we have the land set aside to say, this is where we intend to grow over the next 50 years, and this is our vision for that growth. And so hopefully that provides kind of an overview summary of this very large project we're working on. We appreciate you all being involved very much. It is fulfilling an important council goal. And so with that, I will pass this on to Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest next. And I'm going to pull up the slides.
Hey, so
Excuse me, Beth. Does anyone have any questions for Lori? Michael?
So in the end, is this going to be kind of like a periodic review process where you can actually make all the zone changes, make all the tweaks to your comp plan all at once, and each of those changes individually? Sorry, I don't know if you're familiar with periodic review, but that used to be a process that
Right.
that all cities used to go in and change your plan, but then the cities that were under 10,000, I think they eliminated that opportunity, which was real unfortunate. Is that kind of what you're?
I'll let Beth speak to that. She could probably say it more succinctly.
So you were just asking the question, and just so you know, your microphone was off, so people on Teams couldn't hear you. You were asking the question of, is this going to be like a periodic review process? And the answer is yes and no, or maybe it's no and yes. Periodic review would be a broader process, looking at more of the comprehensive plan. So this doesn't look at the entire comprehensive plan. The yes part of this is that all of the zoning code changes, that kind of thing, they could be adopted all at the same time, or it might be that the city chooses to adopt some of the changes before we adopt the entire project. And I think those are questions that we haven't discussed. There's some good reasons to do it with adopting changes sooner than later. But that's certainly a policy choice, and I think a choice for City Council.
Or no and yes.
I think NJ had just turned on your microphone.
Red means on, so you were good.
To speak into it. No, I think that makes sense. But the reason I bring it up is because, land use is a slow process, and just to make one zone change for one property. I mean, the neat thing about if we can do a periodic review process, you can identify a number of different changes, do them all at the same time rather than have to process for each one. So that's the reason.
I think the idea is to do as
Yeah.
many of them at one time as possible.
That's
But
right.
it may well be that it makes more sense to do one chunk of things sooner and then hold off on the other chunks of things. So I think any rezoning, that kind of thing, would probably happen at one time.
Mhm.
So.
Do we have any other questions? Or Lori, did you have a follow-up to that?
Nope, that's fine. I guess in my thought process of all of this, and you're right, we haven't really talked through this yet, is that as much as we can, unless it made sense to do parts separately, that we would try to roll it together because everything builds off everything else. And staff doesn't have time to piecemeal stuff. If we can do it together, we certainly would.
Thank you. And Beth, do you want to take it from here?
Certainly. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Heather Austin. I did get your last name right, didn't I? Oh, good. I've been worried about that. From 3J Consulting. I know.
Got Anna Eats down.
Right.
I totally can. As long as I wasn't remembering the wrong last name. Heather works with 3J with Anais and does a lot of code work. So she's doing all of our code work for this, and she'll be stepping us through pieces of code changes at this meeting and the next meetings. So she's our code expert. And with that, if we can go on to the next slide. Maybe.
Let's see. Just space. Okay.
Maybe we can't.
I think we're in.
I think
we are.
Oh, there we go.
There it is.
All right, so here's our schedule for this. We'll be able to tell you perhaps after this meeting is one of the follow-ups. In our notes, we'll include the upcoming meeting dates. Here on our schedule, when we did this a week or two ago, we still had the TBDs. But we've got all of those meeting dates scheduled out for the rest of the year. Look at that.
Your agenda.
It's on your agenda under announcements. So you can see the next meetings. I'm only going to read off the first one, which is Tuesday, August 1st at 6 o'clock. That's when we'll next see each other. You can see the other meeting dates on the agenda, which evidently my version didn't have. So Lori's right. For the rest of this year, most of what we'll be working on is development code update. Land use efficiency measures, we'll talk about what that means. They're essentially development code pieces. And then the urban growth boundary and urban reserve alternatives analysis. By the end of the year, the beginning of next year, we should be starting to work on the 50-year plan. You can think of that plan itself as a nice summary plan, which is designed for normal human beings to be able to read, rather than the geeks we have all turned into through this process to be able to read. So that's what's coming up this year. Are there any questions? That schedule?
Lori, when do you have Beth coming to brief City Council?
I haven't decided.
We're going to talk about that tonight, I believe, but we do need to tomorrow. I'm sorry. Yeah, we have a project check-in call tomorrow. We'll try and look at some dates. Yeah.
So we don't want to get too far ahead of the council, of course. Right. Any other questions? Next slide. All right, so what we're talking about today is some changes to public land needs, the process for thinking about an expanded UGB, urban growth boundary, I apologize. We'll talk through land use efficiency measures and how they impact land needs. What's not on here, which should be a bullet on here, is talking about some changes to the zoning code, which come under the category of land use efficiency measures, I guess. And then considerations in the UGB expansion study areas, how we'll be identifying those. And then we'll talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So revisions to the public land needs. I thought we had this nice and nailed down, but we didn't. So this is something that, you know, is just going to continue to change a little bit as we're going along. We needed to relook at the land needs for the city. Before we were saying that in the 2023 to 43 period, we'd be looking at about almost 12 acres of land. We relooked at that. We looked at some of our source data from which we were getting that information, realized that we were double counting some city-owned parcels, both as parkland and as municipal land needs. So we adjusted that. And we fix that analysis essentially. So we're looking at 10 acres over the next 20 years and about 16.5 acres over the next 50 years. And I believe this has been discussed with Public Works and with your city manager, and it makes sense intuitively, as well as making sure we've got the correct data there. It's a minor change. Are there any questions or concerns about that change? All right, so then the next slide, please. This one, I believe, is about parkland. And so the parks project, I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm not in the parks project.
Sorry, I don't know why it's, oh, there we go.
It's going fast.
There we go.
Parks project is having further discussions about parkland need, specifically about need for 5 neighborhood parks, and then how they would be using existing city-owned land for trails. So I expect that may result in some change to the parkland need. And I'm gonna, I think, leave that with the Parks Committee. We just have to wait for those changes to work their way through the discussions. So those are the uncertainties about public land need.
That's good. Mike, have you been attending the committee? Where are they at in terms of working with the consultant? That on some of those revisions and working in trails and neighborhood parks?
I think we're making good progress. We went through the master plan and we talked about levels of service, and there was really a debate between should we be aspirational and add a lot of extra land, or should we go with the average. And I think it's still in progress.
It looks like we have Paul with his hand up.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on the Parks Committee. I'm the park representative for the 50-year plan. And Mike's also on the Parks Committee. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we gave our recommendation, which was a combination of open space land, or undeveloped open space, and then kind of developed open space. So for instance, baseball fields would be developed open space versus space that was just not developed, but still called open space. So we gave our recommendations to MIG, and we have not heard back since because they were not part of the conversation. We had our discussion at our meeting, and then that information was given to MIG, and that's where we are today.
Thank you, Paul.
And I believe there's going to be potentially a council check-in on the level of service discussion. And so that you may see that in an upcoming council agenda as well, just to get clarity on the whole matter. So yes, so this is subject to change, but as Beth said, that's typical at this point in the process when we're getting these things refined. So.
Okay, next slide, please.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a repeat of the summary of what we've got now. We've got a deficit for the next 20 years of 81 acres, and then the 30 years after that of 277 acres. We think that the parkland deficit might change. That may go down from there, could go up from there for all I know, but I don't think that's been the discussion. So when we know more, we'll bring you back more information about that.
I can go back if you guys want to see that.
No, no, I'm fine. Are there any questions before we go on?
Brian Rosenthal, I had a question. So on the land that's ultimately allocated towards parks, the city doesn't already own the land, and you adopt a new comp plan that designates certain parcels as designated for parkland, but the city doesn't own them. Is that really fair to the owners of the property, or how does, I don't.
We wouldn't,
process work.
yeah, we wouldn't necessarily change the designation per se, just like Grabhorn, when we acquired it, was identified as a potential
So you just leave it.
parcel to acquire, right? But the zoning has never been changed on it. Now that we own it, we will likely clean up the maps and zone it parkland. But just because it's mentioned as a potential parcel to acquire wouldn't change the zoning if we don't own it.
Okay, so it wouldn't affect the property.
No, it's more like a theoretical 22 acres somewhere.
Okay, so let's say somebody, just to make sure I understand this correctly, somebody had a parcel that was R5 somewhere, and they were hoping to build a home on it. There's no chance that they would get, their property would be suddenly declared as future parkland, and they wouldn't be able to build.
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Okay, on to the next topic. So expanding the urban growth boundary. This all is under that umbrella. If you'll go to the next slide. So we'll start with land use efficiency measures. There we go.
Sorry. Yep.
That's where I wanted to be. So do you have enough land inside of your urban growth boundary? And this process is similar for urban reserves as it is for UGB expansion. So we'll talk about it as UGB expansion. Parts of this double for establishing urban reserves. So do you have enough land within your urban growth boundary to accommodate your growth? If the answer was yes, then you would not do a UGB expansion. If the answer is no, then you look at policy changes, which are things like zoning code and map changes that make your use of your existing land in your urban growth boundary more efficient. So can we rezone some land from a type of land that we have a surplus of to a type of land that we have a deficit of? It has to make sense to do this. You don't want to just willy-nilly rezone things. Can you change your zoning code to allow a little bit more housing in some places, or make other changes that will increase the efficiency of your land use? And if the, let's say the answer is yes to some of those. So do you have enough land now? Do you have an 81 acre deficit still? Let's just posit that now we've got a 60 acre deficit. So if the answer was yes, we had enough land, then there's no further action. And if the answer is still no, we don't have enough land, then you start looking at an urban growth boundary expansion, which will explain some of the basics of how that works in a little bit later in this meeting. You do things like you establish your study areas, you figure out what land you're considering, you do comparison of the land based on certain considerations, which we'll talk about. And you eventually expand your urban growth boundary. You do an adoption process, you get state acknowledgement. Hopefully this doesn't involve an appeal to LUBA or any other court. It's basically the last two steps are the same for urban reserves. So we'll be doing double duty with this, is following the urban growth boundary process through, and then also establishing urban reserves as we go along. It's a little different set of regulations for doing that, but very similar. So that's sort of our framework. I'll probably bring up this slide over and over again and point to where we are at in it. If it doesn't make sense to you right now, I think that's okay. If you're wildly confused, you might tell me, but it should start making sense. I know, Christine. It should start making sense as we go through this today, and then more as we go through this in the next few meetings. But before I go on, does anybody have any questions? Okay. We'll make sure that you understand all I said by the end of the next meeting, certainly. So what I think we're going to cover now is some of our land use efficiency measures. Heather's going to walk us through some potential changes to the development code. These are things that we've been talking with Laurie and NJ about. Of course, these are eventually things that will need to go to the Planning Commission, and the City Council will make recommendations about them. And what we're hoping to hear from you is whether you have reservations, concerns about them, feedback on them. I can't promise you what will that will absolutely change them based on the feedback, but we certainly want your feedback. Laurie, is there anything else you want to add about what feedback we're looking for?
No, I think that's it. We want to know what the sentiment is, if you have concerns about some of the things that are being proposed. And most of the land use efficiency measures are things that, granted, it's been a while, but you have seen before when MIG and Johnson Economics folks were here to talk about basically it was the end of the housing capacity analysis. They produced a report, measures to accommodate needed housing. And the majority of the land use efficiency measures that Heather will be going over tonight were pulled from that last report that they did.
Thank you, Lori and Beth. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Yeah, Lori, if you just want to go ahead and click it one more time and we'll just put it all up there
Okay,
and then
sure.
I can talk through it. So what we are talking about tonight is the land use efficiency measures, and they really center on residential land. So there's not a lot of land use. Sorry about that. There are not a lot of land use efficiency measures that we would be looking at on our employment lands, but we are focused on the residential lands for where we can find the most, I guess, bang for your buck on how you efficiently develop land, both within your current urban growth boundary, and this would apply if you do find that an expansion is needed. So you'd be carrying these land use reforms forward. And as it says on the slide, these three categories that we're discussing tonight that are all related to residential housing, they are overlapping, as you'll see. So land use efficiency measures are things like looking at your minimum lot sizes, your maximum building coverage on your sites, and your multifamily spacing and buffers, which are in your current development code. And then we look at the code cleanup items, which are things like definitions, clarifying when an ADU or a secondary structure can be built, and how things are reviewed between Planning Commission and City Council. And then you'll see the overlap happens when we start looking into the larger context of what are the state required things that we have to do. And those do include minimum lot sizes for duplexes. That is one that's required right now in Scappoose. We look at parking minimums for duplex and ADU. Again, those are currently required. Manufactured home standards, our current code is not compliant with the most recent legislation, as well as certain definitions that the state has cities changing in their development code. There are also a few overlaps with land use efficiency measures and state mandates because of the size of Scappoose, and I think you've all discussed this. You're very close to that 10,000 person population threshold, and that is when duplexes come into account. So you might be just under that right now, but since we are preparing for the future and looking forward, we are presenting that material that'll be imminently part of your community.
And to be clear here, some of the changes that we're talking about, like the code cleanup, that kind of thing, Laurie's being the efficient planner and trying to get all of these things done at once so that, you don't have 10 different hearing processes for many, many different changes. So some of these things are, like the code cleanup, are more about fixing existing issues. The state mandated pieces are about fixing future, but soon to be issues. And then the land use efficiency measures are about the 50 years of growth.
I had a question, Brian Rosenthal. So when we had our meeting and we discussed efficiency measures, we did not reduce our lot sizes like this. We only had a couple small tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to go off the 10,000 person state mandate? Is that what's going on here?
That is not related to minimum. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just saying she'll walk through that.
Okay, yes. So we did talk about that when planning this presentation this evening, and Lori did let me know that you hadn't discussed those as part of your land use efficiency measures. So what we did, though, is looked back at your housing capacity analysis recently created, which I believe was after those land use efficiency measures. And we did find that there are some housing types that need more production in the city. And so what these lot sizes would do is reduce barriers to the construction of the type of housing types that are needed in the city, both in the current UGB and then looking forward. So these would be applicable to these zones as you apply them into future areas of the city as well. And it brings the duplex is the state mandated at 10,000. That second column with numbers in it, that when you get to this 10,000 population, immediately you have to allow any duplex to be constructed on the same size lot with the same zoning restrictions as any single family detached home. So that one is definitely coming.
Let's let Brian finish up
Yeah,
here, Christine, then we'll go to you.
I don't think I quite got my question answered. So those reductions in lot sizes, I would see no reason to do it before we legally have to. Because two things. First of all, it allows us to get a bigger land grab now, because then our amount of land that we'll need will be larger. And second of all, I think generally people prefer not to be on cookie cutter lots that live in Scappoose. So it's a double whammy. And you say we're almost there, but I believe we're at about 8,000 people right now. Well, 2,000 people is 20% of our current population. That's not going to happen in 6 months. Yeah, that was my thought. But again, there's a benefit to this because the benefit is that we'll then have a larger need for land, which means that we can have a larger UGB, we can have a larger reserve, and there's nothing stopping the city from adopting smaller lot sizes in the future if it's so decided. And so it gives us the flexibility. But once we do this, as far as I know, we're stuck with it. And so I don't see why we would do it now instead of doing it outside of this process if we're not mandated to do it.
20 years.
Or if it's 5. But the point is, it would allow us to take more land into our UGB, would give a better quality of life for people in the near run, and if it's not state mandated, I mean, people I've talked to, nobody likes the little tiny 3,000 square foot lots.
Every time you say land efficiency, I think urban. I don't think that there's anybody here that wants to be urban.
I think that's absolutely true. And I thank both of you for those comments. I think they're very valid. I do, though, want to make sure we're keeping in mind what our housing capacity analysis says, which is we have some need to provide housing at price points that are a little less than what current single family lot sizes would support. And so we are looking at providing housing for a part of the population that can't afford those larger lots.
Well,
I think that is.
sorry, but one last thing, I'll be quiet for a while. But we actually did, as part of this process, we established that we did not want to vastly alter our ratio of multifamily from single family homes, because that was part of our structure that allowed us to have a family centered, school, sports kind of culture here, and not having as many transient people that are just using us as a place to live, until they move on to the next place. And so
this doesn't alter the mix of housing. This allows for development of housing on somewhat smaller lots, and perhaps we don't want to consider all of these pieces, but Heather does have an important point that looking at, say, your A1 and looking at the required lot sizes there, that can allow you to get a little bit more multifamily housing. And if you've got less land involved in the development, it can be less expensive. I would look closely at your manufactured home parks, because a 7,000 square foot lot for a manufactured home is quite large.
I'm not saying there's not something that we could move, but rents over at the Candle are surely not more affordable than anywhere else in town, and it's very high density by SCAPU standards.
Mhm.
Again, the way I feel like this is being presented is that we're stuck with the lot size if we leave them now where they're at. But what I'm saying is, no, we're not. We can adjust it in a couple of years, but we can use this as an opportunity to get more land into our UGB, more land into our urban reserve, and we can work better with it. If we're not legally required.
You are legally required to consider land use efficiency measures. I think if you have no land use efficiency measures, I think that is going to be a big red flag for a number of different organizations, as well as the state. So you are required to consider
And
them.
I'm fine with that. I think we had a discussion. It didn't include almost any of this. I think we need to go back and have another discussion on these particulars, because
These were actually pulled in from that study I was mentioning earlier that you guys looked at like last June.
yeah, but when we asked it, we said no.
So if I can jump into, there are no changes proposed to the minimum lot sizes for single family detached. This is just showing a change to the other housing types that could be constructed in those zones currently by code. So all it's saying is you're taking those other housing types and making them more similar to your single family detached housing lot size, but your single family detached lot sizes are not being changed here.
And so let me just say, this is the first discussion of this.
Mhm.
So it may well be that we need to have more discussion of it, and I think that's going to be okay. But here's our first discussion, and I think it would be good to give Heather a chance to present some of what she's got.
Jeff had
And Jeff, you had something.
Yeah, excuse me, Jeff Weiss. At the last meeting or the meeting before, didn't we revise the population growth?
Mhm.
So it's like 2% now or something?
No, it's not 2%. I want to say it's just over 1%. What
1.3.
what they did was they made sure to true up the difference between the last forecast they had before the census number came in, and then trued it up to the actual census population. So it altered it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you said we had to wait for Heather to go through it, but could we, what she has to say, of course, but then say, once we hit 10,000, if we ever hit 10,000, then we could do it, or is it, we're gonna put it in at 8,300?
No, I just wanted to give Heather a chance to give you the presentation of what she's got, and then I think some discussion of it.
Mhm.
It's just we went quickly to this slide, and this slide is one that has a lot of red on it. And so I think our intention is to take what we hear from you all and take that to City Council and Planning Commission and discuss with them based on giving your feedback.
One final question on this. Is it your professional opinion that if we were to get rid of half of those red lines, that it would cause a problem with the state?
It is my professional opinion that you have to make a good faith effort to make land use
We're
efficient.
gonna have to do something more than what we originally had decided we wanted to do.
Definitely, because you're both having to prove to the state as well as to any land watch groups that are keeping an eye and saying, how much land does Scappoose really need and what could they be doing to accommodate some of their population growth?
Thank you.
That case will need to be made. Do you have to do all of it? Probably not, but what is the incremental impact of each one of these? Because like I said, we're not changing your single family detached minimum lot size, which are, generously sized, which is what this community would like to see for their single family detached. So what you're saying then is if you're choosing to build a middle housing type, or you're in the high density or MH zone and can build multifamily, those are the zones where we want to focus the density, right? So we want to preserve our low density R1 zone. We want to make sure that those lots stay at 6,000 square feet, that nobody's building something on a 5,000 square foot lot. And then you step into R4. R4 is like a transition zone, right? It's not your lowest density, your larger lots. It's your, okay, we want to build something that's a little more approachable price point wise. We want to build something that's maybe a little closer to services where you'd want to walk and get out of your car. And then when you get to your MH and A1 zone, that's where you want to see your population density. You want to provide those housing types that people can afford. And so these are incremental steps, but those single family detached home lots don't change in this proposal. So, we're really starting to see a lot more duplex type development, middle housing type development, because it's more of what people want to live in and more of what people can afford, and allows more tax base, more services to be provided. So it's sort of been a balancing act, with communities. I hear in a lot of communities this size that we don't want to be more dense, but then when you really look at it and say, well, where have you decided to put your density? And then you think, okay, well, the A1 zone and the MH zone are where it should be. Great. Let's see the most red in those lines. Let's really be protective of our R1 zone and make sure that those opportunities are available. So that's what's being presented here. But like Beth said, this is the beginning of the conversation. We're certainly not drafting any code right now. There's nothing going on yet until we've had a chance to fully vet it with this group and with your decision makers.
Well, it's good to understand. Thank you for going over it with us.
Does everybody know what middle housing types are?
No.
Okay, so townhouses are middle housing types. Townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage housing, which are small detached units. They're just small and on small lots. And I think that's all. And so if you think about things and you think about what kind of opportunities do we want to allow more housing for? Well, we want to allow, I hear this a lot, more opportunities for home ownership. Well, something like cottage housing or townhouses are pretty frequently a home ownership type of housing. Things like duplexes, sometimes you'll have a person own one half or live in one half and rent out the other half. You can get interesting things going with quads and triplexes with multi-generational households. These can all be rental housing, but they can also be ownership housing. I personally grew up in townhouses. We rented, some we owned. And they're the most, townhouses are the most like single family housing. It's a unit connected to one or more other units on its own lot. And that's how it's different from something like a duplex. Does that help a little?
So why is there a middle housing type in the manufactured housing zoning?
I don't know.
The manufactured housing zoning district essentially is identical to the R4 moderate density in every way except for the manufactured housing zoning district allows for manufactured home parks. Other than that, they're identical.
I'm sorry if it's a naive question. So right now in City of Scappoose, you put your manufactured home on any city lot?
Residential lot, yes, you can.
And that is state law.
And that's different than a manufactured home park. So
Correct.
I own my own lot. I can put a manufactured home on it. I could build a stick-built home, which is what you're typically referring to. In a manufactured home park, then you can have individual manufactured homes on land that's all owned by the same park owner. So it's different.
Is that up for discussion about where you can put your manufactured home?
Well, you can't say that you can't have a manufactured home on just a regular lot. That's state law. So I own a lot. I want to put a manufactured home on it. It's zoned for housing. And it's zoned for single family housing. Then I can put a manufactured home on that. I don't quite know what you'd be asking if it was related to manufactured home parks, if anything.
There are, and I actually have a slide on manufactured homes that we can get to here in a moment. So we can talk about that more, but there are certain minimum provisions that the state requires for a manufactured home park, but it's really related to size. You can have design standards and things in a manufactured home park, and the Scappoose code is not far out of compliance, if at all, with those currently. And there are design standards, setback standards, open space requirements, space between units, all of that is in your current code. Do we want to talk more about this, or should we look at the other slides and then we can always circle back?
Let's move on. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, so this slide doesn't have any red lines on it because we're not proposing to change any current maximum building coverage for the primary structure on the site. But what we are suggesting with this slide that when you are proposing an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, that you could increase the coverage on your lot to be able to accommodate that ADU. ADUs currently are required to be permitted. That is over 2,500 population. So Scappoose is subject to the ADU requirements. You are not required to change your maximum building coverage, but you do almost preclude the opportunity to provide an ADU if you have lot coverage that's too small to allow it. So these propose 50% maximum lot coverage only for lots that have an ADU, only when you're going to do that.
Will you explain what a lot coverage ratio is?
Oh, yes. The lot coverage ratio is how much of your lot can be covered with building. So if you have a 1,000 square foot lot, just to make it really simple, you can have 350 square feet of that covered by the home in the R1 zoning. With the ADU, you'd increase that to half of it. Half of the lot could be building and half would be yard. So you'd still have all your setbacks that are required. You'd still have the spacing between your lot and the other lots and from your lot to the public street, but you would increase what can be built on your lot. And again, this is an efficiency standard to be able to actually permit ADUs to occur. And accessory dwelling units are considered another type of housing that can be, really support those all different income levels as well. Yes. Yes.
Not unless you're meeting the building codes
Mhm.
for that, for a habitable space. Yeah, so there would be potentially a way to get there. But you would,
Mhm.
yes, have them contact my office. Okay.
And there are building code requirements too that would
Right. I mean, it's really comes down to fire life safety issues primarily. You know, you want to make sure that what they're creating to be a livable space is safe and meets the building codes. But we'd be happy to talk with them if they need some.
Chair, we've got a
Action.
comment online from Debbie.
Debbie?
Yes, I'm just curious, does the city of Scappoose have any tenancy requirements for ADUs, or do they care if it's rental, or does it have to be permanent occupancy? Because I know right now the county, state law mandated that the county require ADUs in the rural residential zones, but it prohibits vacation occupancy, which pretty much means that you have to, the rental, I mean, you can be a rental, but it has to be rental for over 90 days, which is defined as vacation occupancy.
And Debbie, no, we don't have that requirement in our code, although we don't currently permit short-term rentals.
Okay.
So it's not been an issue here yet. Yeah, and so no, there's no tenancy requirements,
Okay,
or
so
it's not mentioned in our code.
Okay, so they can be short-term rentals and stuff like that then.
Well, we don't allow short-term rentals.
Okay,
Currently.
okay. So all right, so this is okay, never let you okay, so you don't allow short-term rentals, but they have no vacation. Okay. All right, good enough. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie.
Mhm.
Other questions or comments about minimum lot sizes for ADU lots?
I don't see a problem with this if it gives us brownie points towards making an effort. I think it's fine. I'd be more concerned about the lot size reductions than I am this. So this would be one I would think would be pretty innocuous just to include.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. This is in your A1 zone, your high density zone. You currently have standards regarding the distance between the buildings on the same lot. So how those buildings are spaced to one another, as well as a special buffer requirement that's in addition to your setbacks. So currently you have to have 15 feet between buildings on the site. And to allow a more efficient building on the site, we are suggesting 10 feet. This would allow the two buildings to each have a 3-foot buffer area where a door could open and you could have landscaping, and then a 4-foot pathway between. This is a pretty common building to building setback width on a higher density development, so only for your A1 zone. And then your special buffer requirement currently says that it's applicable to all multifamily or live work units. And so we looked at that and thought, well, what if it only applies when you're over 2 stories in height? Because once you're 2 stories or under, your mass is more like a single family detached or a duplex type home, and it's less likely to have an impact. Therefore, your standard setback would apply as it would in your R1 or R4 zone, but you would still be able to develop that lot to that setback line without having to add an additional 15 feet of landscaping. So that's those. That special buffer requirement is also in your commercial zones, but since we're just talking about residential this evening, we limited it to the A1. Questions or comments about that?
Might have gone too far.
Okay, and here are 2 separate parking requirements. The first one is regarding accessory dwelling units, and this one we do have to do at this time. We are subject to the accessory dwelling unit code standards because of our size, over 2,500 people. We currently require 1 additional on-site parking space for an ADU if the existing home has 3 or fewer parking spaces. We can no longer say anything about requiring parking for the ADU. So we just have to basically strike that piece of code that's required by state law. The duplex is required at 10,000. So right now we require 4 off-street parking spaces per duplex developments. That's 2 per dwelling unit. What the 10,000 is requiring and what best practices is recommending is a 2 off-street parking spaces for the duplex, for the whole duplex. So the idea is that a duplex should develop and build and look and feel similar to a single family detached home. So the more parking you require, we end up seeing sometimes 4 across driveways, which makes it look just not as good as a single family home with a 2 space driveway. We want to see the scale and the mass of the duplex look similar to the single family detached. So having the same setbacks and lot sizes and parking requirements allows that to happen. Once you require more off-street parking, more of that site has to be developed as impervious surface to park your vehicles on. Questions about that? Comments?
I remember correctly from the first time we visited this, we raised the concern, this community really lacks sidewalks. And pedestrian safety is a big issue. And so I do have some concern putting more cars on streets, particularly in certain areas that might be, high traffic for kids getting to school and that. Is it possible to have different set of rules for different areas of town?
It's definitely possible. I don't know if that's been done in different districts of town. Probably.
The only place where we currently have different standards is in the downtown overlay. And so not to say that there's different standards starting out, but there's language that on the west side of Highway 30 between certain streets, you can request 100% parking reduction on site. And then on the east side of 30, within a certain region, you can request, I think it's up to a 25% reduction. I believe the reason for the 100% reduction, and Brian, you might know, but I'm thinking it's because of the traditional grid and lot sizes on the west side of town. It just literally doesn't permit.
No land.
There's no land to park.
It was not done out of desire or appearance or anything else.
Right.
Because basically you couldn't develop.
Correct.
You had to create parking. So just figure it out kind of deal. On the duplex, when we previously discussed parking on this back when we were talking about our accommodations, we had suggested something that I thought was a good compromise at the time, but I don't see it included here. We said originally it was two spaces per dwelling. What we had said is if you have a 2-bedroom, 2 spaces. If you have a 1-bedroom or studio, we would change it to 1 space. That way it wouldn't create the impact for the neighborhood, but it would also encourage affordable housing. Because now that if you're going to cram as much on this parcel as you can, so if the goal is affordable housing, it would encourage 1-bedroom and studios be part of the duplex because you get a reduction in parking. So it would actually accomplish one of our goals, also reduce the parking requirement and create a bounce. I thought in our previous meetings, that seemed like where we were at. I don't see it here. Is there a reason we can't do that?
There's not a reason you can't do that. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that. But I do have a question for staff on that same topic. Do you currently have multifamily parking standards based on bedroom count?
We do.
Okay.
Except, and I will just say that except that single family and duplex are under the same heading and it's 2 per unit, period. So if duplex were to roll into more of the multifamily, it's 1.5 stalls for a 1-bedroom, and then it's for a 1 and 2 bedroom. And then it's 1 stall if it's a studio, and if it's 3 or more, it's 2. So there's kind of a mix.
And the group kind of agreed that that was a way to give a little break on the parking without flooding the streets with extra cars. It was a balanced approach. And I don't think we necessarily have to follow the standard we're doing elsewhere, but just so that we don't get 2-bedroom duplexes with 2 or 3 cars apiece with 2 parking spaces. That was kind of the feeling at the time of the group.
And Brian, I will mention that, of course, we haven't been privileged to the discussions that you had with MIG earlier in the project. So I apologize. Those kind of things aren't in here.
It just seemed like it was a more of a, not required, it seemed like more of a balanced approach. It also helps with affordability because it encourages smaller units. Basically, any developer is gonna, the biggest thing he can pack a lot, quantity and size, the additional square footage costs very little.
Right.
And you get a lot more in rent. So it gives some enticement to create affordable housing. One of the ways you do that is you make it so that it's not necessarily quite as a duplex in, or if you put a bedroom and a one bedroom, where two bedrooms in, might not necessarily be able to do that because, you know,
Thank you for bringing that up with us. The reason I asked staff if there's currently multifamily standards based on bedroom count was not necessarily to use those same bedroom counts, but because we don't generally recommend adding bedroom count basis into codes because it can be cumbersome for staff to make sure that that's occurring by the time it gets to the building permit stage and the structure is being constructed. All of a sudden that office now has a closet and now it's a bedroom, so it's something that we tend to shy away from looking at bedroom count when we use development code standards. But if it's already happening in the city and there's already processes to do that, I think we could keep doing that if that's staff's.
I want to give Jeanette a chance to jump in online.
Oh, thank you, NJ. My question was also about the parking sizes. Would that be in the code? What would be considered a vehicle? Defining a vehicle? Would that be part of the code?
Well, Jeanette, we do have standards for parking stall length and width, whether it's a standard stall or it's a compact stall. So yeah, that is in the development code.
Okay, just want to know. Thank you.
Sure.
The silly question, sorry.
I was just gonna say, if there's another way besides bedroom count per parking stall that achieves what we want, but it's easier on staff and more objective, we definitely want to hear it.
How do you know that the street has, what do you do to make sure that the street has the capacity to accommodate all of the different kinds of housing needs when they're designated to the street?
There's a few different ways to do that, and I am sorry, I don't know your public works manual, but some of that has to do with driveway width. It has to do with lot width. So what we run into is when you require additional off-street parking, generally you require additional driveway space. So once you cut in a driveway, you have less on-street parking. So it's kind of this like balancing act, do you get the space on the lot and take up some of the space that could be used either for housing or for yard, or do you put it on the street adjacent to a curb and a sidewalk? Where there are curbs and sidewalks, so that you make sure that you're keeping space for both cars, garbage and recycling bins. We hear a lot that once you cut a large enough driveway, you don't have enough space to park a car and put out all the bins on the bin day. And so it's a balancing act for sure between how much driveway there is, how wide the lot is, and how much on-site parking is required.
You require the roads to be wider because some of these are so narrow as they are, and it's just a single lane to pass.
There are standards for how wide the right-of-way width needs to be in order for parking to be allowed. On both sides or on one side, even, yeah.
Michael.
I was going to say the more dense you have the housing, the wider the streets because you need that additional space to put parking on both sides. Typically what happens.
Yeah, and so in our typical local street standard in a new subdivision, the right-of-way width is 54 feet. The paved width is, I believe, 36 feet. And so that allows for two lanes of travel in each one in each direction, and then parking on each side. So, and that's the minimum.
Does it get larger if you have a street of townhouses or a street of duplexes?
No, because it would still permit parking on both sides and the two lanes of travel. So it would still be a local street section.
Right. The larger streets, the wider streets are once you step into that neighborhood route collector arterial designation. So those are for more of your streets that are carrying the through traffic. But on your local residential streets, generally 36 feet of pavement is enough for 2 cars to pass each other without having to dip into the parking area and then have parking on both sides. Once you dip down to parking on one side, then you do see widths more like 28 feet of pavement. I don't know.
Yep,
for
I
sure.
think it's
Okay.
about 28 for the parking on one side.
Mhm.
All right, Jeanette.
Jeanette?
Thank you, Angie. So just a thought, and more, I'm thinking more of the condensed areas. What about if we can put in the code that there is the developers put like the first floor or something, parking underneath as part of the development to fix the parking issue? So we won't have, especially on very dense properties or developments. Can
So
we do that?
Tuck beneath parking is very, very expensive. It drives up the price of development considerably. Certainly it happens, but at that point, you're not talking about housing that's affordable for, say, your workforce. At that point, you're talking about housing that's much more expensive.
You're talking about multifamily, right?
I've seen tuck beneath for townhouses, and it certainly happens for townhouses, but for multifamily also, it also happens for that.
In that, are you
I'm sorry.
talking about?
Sorry, can I finish? I'm just saying for those really condensed, and also I saw on another slide like the live and work place. So if they're going to be working, so then additional parking for whoever is their customers, right? So it's a live and work. That's how I kind of see the businesses in the bottom and they live on top. So wouldn't it be a great idea to incorporate the parking as part of the development?
Live work doesn't necessarily have customers coming to the workplace. It may also include work that is somebody working in their studio or something like that.
There's just a minimal parking requirement for the live work units. But typically, like you just said, you'll have the commercial space, the work unit on the bottom floor. So it might be difficult then to also try and fit parking, underneath on that bottom floor as well.
Yeah. Well, it was just a thought.
Yes, thank you.
Other thoughts?
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if there are other thoughts or discussion for this slide. Sounds like we want to look at a few more ideas for the duplex, options we can provide. Move to the next slide. So now we get into those state mandated changes. We talked about these are both related to manufactured homes. So currently our code has a lot of provisions for building or placing a manufactured home on a single family detached lot. We cannot keep any of these. The state law changed in 2021, I believe, to require that a manufactured home on an individual lot is subject to the same standards as a stick-built home. So that we don't have an ability to place additional standards on. The manufactured home park, like I said, you have a lot of standards in that code section that can stay. So once you are in a manufactured home park, there can be quite a few design and open space and setback standards that are particular to that type of development. However, the current code has a 2-acre minimum park size and state says we have to reduce that to 1 acre. Those are both state mandated changes. Any questions about that?
For the math, how many trailers can you put on a 1 acre park?
I don't know the density. Do you?
No.
Wasn't it 5,000 square foot lots?
Well, no, this is a
park.
This is a park, so it's one legal lot. And then, with the actual park, I don't know off the top of my head because it would depend on sort of the arrangement of the roads through there, the setbacks, and
Off the top of my head, if you just want a shot in the dark, I'd say between 16 and 24 on an acre.
Scappoose doesn't have any, do you have any property that's on?
Yeah, we do. Like I said, it functions very similar to our R4 zone. As far as what we have, like vacant, available, buildable, I'm not quite sure of that acreage. I wouldn't imagine there's a whole lot of it, no. That's available for building.
Okay, next slide.
May have-
I'm
Sorry,
finished.
I have a question again.
Yes.
Rolling back to the trailer park.
Yeah.
So, I mean, isn't there a way that, like, is it a neighborhood association that can say, hey, we have this one aesthetic image, and then you can't roll in your single wide? They don't, that's no.
No, the state law actually overrules any CC&Rs, codes, covenants, and restrictions, any.
So fantastic.
Yeah, so you can't say that they can't be placed on a single family detached lot.
So do we want to go back to the first slide that got everybody's juices pumping?
Yeah. Sure.
Yes, there you go.
There we go.
So here, maybe we should consider each different housing type, and talk about them that way. So like the single family detached, there's no change proposed there.
This is only once we reach 10,000, right?
No, there's no changes proposed at all, even at 10,000 for single family detached. So we would remain at 6,000 for R1, 5,000 for R4 and MH.
And so then, maybe we can get your suggestions on what we do with each of these different housing types. The duplex, the middle housing, we might talk about those together, and the multifamily housing, talk about those together because we've got them separated out a little bit. Is that okay? So the duplex, suggesting taking it down to the same density as single family housing. I heard a fair bit of discomfort with that.
It's the 10,000.
You would be required
Mhm.
to at 10,000. It's a recommended land use efficiency measure to help you in your urban growth boundary project.
I don't have my book. Does anybody have the numbers when the estimate is that we will be at 10,000 for conversations?
So I would say that your population forecast, you'd be hitting 10,000 towards the end of your 20-year period.
That's what I thought. Too.
I would say that that's a conservative forecast, and you may well be hitting it considerably sooner.
Well, I think we'll hit it sooner, but just for this sake, let's stick with the state's recommendation.
Sure, that is fair. I think it's also reasonable to ask Laurie why she was thinking about doing this now rather than, in 5 to 7 to 10 years from now.
Well, there's a whole lot of stuff I've saved up for this project. Right. And you'll see some of the other things here and there maybe, but it's code cleanup stuff, and it's to be in a better position once we are rolling out at 10,000. I don't know how soon that will be. But if we are needing to provide and show land use efficiency measures in order to expand our urban growth boundary, this just seems like kind of an obvious one for us to go ahead with now. It gets us that much further ahead when it is required, and again checks the box for state mandated, and checks the box for land use efficiency measures. But again, that's up for discussion for this committee and ultimately for city council's decision.
I had a couple thoughts here. One of my concerns is I'd like to keep affordability of houses in our community.
Mm-hmm.
So that we have people, our kids can come back here, buy a house, not bankrupt them. You make the lot size the same as it is for a house. You're encouraging people to build duplexes instead of houses. And we talked about wanting to keep our current ratios similar to what they are now.
Mhm.
And what this will do is it will not perpetuate keeping our ratios similar to what we have now. We have it stated that we want those ratios the same. That's our plan. But this actually would counteract that, because a developer will look and say, well, wait a second, if I can build a duplex or I can build a house, I can make more money with the duplex probably. And so you're going to encourage that. Also, again, if we don't incorporate these new numbers now, we get more land. So we're cutting our own throat. We're doing something that we don't have to do. So that now, if you said we need to show something, then sure, let's knock it down from 10,000 a little, but let's not bring it down to the same as a house. You know, so I mean, I like to leave it where it's at, but I'd feel okay with maybe 8,000 square feet. You know, but not 6. Where we're basically making it the same as a house. It seems.
Beth, did you want to just, I don't know if you want to speak to this now or later, but this notion of trying to get as much land as we can and sort of that difficulty possibly of that 50-acre threshold?
Sure. So what Laurie's talking about is if you do a urban growth boundary expansion of 50 acres or less, let's call it 49.9 acres. Then the review process for that goes through the Department of Land Conservation and Development through their director. It's got a much lower level of scrutiny. And so, I mean, it can still end up in court, of course, but the level of scrutiny is lower.
More of like an administrative thing.
Closer to that, but I wouldn't actually say that it's
understand.
safe.
Yeah.
Nothing
Makes it
is that
sound
simple.
safe.
I'm just trying to make it and put it into a box that may
Mhm.
not fit perfectly. I thought we were already well over 50 acres.
Well, we are, and so that's part of what we've been looking at and considering. We've got some areas that we're going to talk about rezoning around commercial land, I think from industrial, if I'm remembering correctly, to reduce the industrial land deficit, and also to make sure that, you know, we're looking at it intelligently. You wouldn't want to put, you know, let's say this is Highway 30, you wouldn't want to put commercial land, you know, down over here. You want it somewhere around Highway 30 so that we're making good planning decisions. We're balancing those things. But if we can get below 50 acres, then it's a lower threshold and a lower standard.
So you do think that we may be up below 50? I thought we were significantly above it. I don't.
We're 81 right now. It depends partially on what goes on with parks.
Correct.
And say parks weren't in that takes us down to a 60-acre deficit, maybe 59-acre deficit. And then you're so darn close.
We could
looking at it.
Possibly get there.
Are you saying that requirement would recommend if we had a choice of going for 49.9 acres or 58, say 49.9?
Oh, yes.
Yes, and I think
Oh, yes.
your city attorney would too.
Yes.
I think the level of risk is different.
So there's a significant chance that they'll put back at us.
No, I'm saying that there's a different level of review. I don't know. I mean, if there's a chance, of course, there's always a chance. But you'll get a different level of attention. And one of the things that, so one of the things that, you know, we wouldn't necessarily want to say in our findings is we're trying to maximize our urban growth boundary expansion.
No, I would never put.
No, but I'm not writing it down either. So there's considerations there.
Okay. And outside of that, though, away from our stated goal, we had ratios the same. If you make a duplex the same size lot as a house, not state mandated. It needs to be something like that's going to be incentivizing us being a community of homeowners.
And so what do
our community of renters?
What do other people think? Do they think that you'd recommend that the duplex be a bigger lot size? Yeah. I'm seeing at least 1 or 2 nods. Maybe there's some people who don't care as much.
Feet, I think.
Yeah, 8,000 we could reasonable.
So does 8,000 feet sound like something if we went and said to the city council, there's concerns about being the same size as a single family lot, but 8,000 feet for a duplex sounded more plausible? We be representing you correctly.
Michael, did you have a comment?
Michael, you can just leave it on too.
Okay, technically impaired, you noticed. I guess my question is if you were talking about this quicker, simpler process to,
No, not that quicker and simpler,
well,
less risky.
yeah, maybe less, well, anyway, it seems like it's your recommendation. My question is, wouldn't the buildable lands inventory still work against you? Don't have I mean, basically, you have a study that says that you don't need to grow very much in the future, and so you could, in order to get the LCD to say, yeah, thumbs up, you can add this area to your urban growth boundary, but you still have to meet that standard.
Yeah, so your urban growth boundary expansion will be based on your economic opportunities analysis, your housing capacity analysis, and any land use efficiency measures that you put into place. So whatever land can be accommodated within the current UGB, plus whatever you can add by making more efficient use of that land with rezoning, with these code changes, if there's any other type of tax or financial incentives that the city considers. There's a whole long list of land use efficiency measures, but development code changes tend to be, well, they're my area of expertise. I don't speak on the others as well because I don't get into city financing in that same way. But they do tend to be an effective tool in demonstrating an efficient use of land. And so you do have to make the case for the amount of land you ask to expand your UGB, and that has to be fact-based, and your facts come from your adopted documents that show those land needs in addition to what capacity you have in your existing UGB.
Yep, different way than I would have said it, but yep. Yeah, so Brian, the existing housing needs analysis that includes a buildable lands inventory is part of the fact base that we're starting from. And that's what's told us how much deficit we've got of land. That's what we're starting from. So was there some agreement about, talking to the council and planning commission about duplexes, maybe looking at an 8,000 square foot lot size?
Like that's for your low density zone, but then for your moderate density manufactured housing and high density.
So take it down to 6.
For moderate. How about the increment, middle housing increment? How do you feel about the 1,500 versus 2,000? Where you're adding a unit and so you need this much more space.
That one's one that I kind of like it, 1,500, because it's townhomes.
Yeah.
You can build 8 townhomes in a row and sell them. That's someplace where the teachers where teachers can live.
Workforce housing, yeah.
Workforce housing, they're perfect. They're great for workforce housing. I like it in the middle housing.
So Chair Kessie, are you saying that you like taking the first 2 units down to 5,000 and after the first 2 units down to 1,500? Or are you commenting on only one section
Just after the first 2 units.
Okay. So maybe we look at the first 2 units of middle housing being the same standard that we're talking about as duplexes. So that would be in the R4 and MH, 6,000 square feet. And then the after that, 1,500 square feet.
Look good to me.
There are comments on that?
Hey, Pat, I'm looking at A1 high density, right now? Going across the bottom, is that what we're doing?
We are
You're looking at
R4.
the middle too.
Still R4,
Or
okay.
an M4 or MH, excuse me. But now we can look at A1 if there's no other comments on this. And again, A1 is where
I don't have a problem with that.
I think that's a decent middle ground. You're showing that you're making some efficiency changes, but it's still in keeping, trying to reflect the values and livability here.
And then how about your A1 zone? And remember, we're not looking to increase the amount of A1 zone or, like you said, change the balance of how much land is designated for high density versus low density. But this might be a right place to really make the most changes because this is where you as a city have determined that you want to put your most dense housing.
And you hardly have any land in it. Most of your denser housing is going into EC. Am I remembering correctly?
We adopt numbers on A1. Are we going to adopt the same numbers in EC, or are they completely separate options?
EC is different because the EC doesn't have a minimum lot size. It has a minimum density, but not a maximum density. So basically, if you can get all of the provisions on your lot, like your parking, your open space, and things like that, those are your limitations.
Okay. So A1, that 1,500 square feet per residence is pretty tight. I mean, an acre is about 44,000 square feet, so it's roughly 30 per acre.
Well, plus the original first two that you're talking about.
You're
We
feeling,
can-
Pat?
That's where A1 zoning is where you want your density, right? I mean,
Yeah.
those areas of town, there's not much of it. Those areas of town.
There's hardly any, although we might talk about looking at some rezoning to clearly identify where that A1 zoning could be located. So that would be part of future discussions of,
Few parcels. We're not talking about
no, we're
a
not,
lot of acres.
no,
We're talking about maybe I can't
or
remember.
less.
Yeah. So a very small amount of acreage.
Okay.
Lori asked me to research other like-sized, distanced from urban area communities. And this is pretty similar. It is around 26, 27 units per acre if this is on a net density square footage. So that is pretty much the same as St. Helens. It's the same as North Plains. It's the same as mini Forest Grove, I believe. I can't remember the other communities I quoted you, but many similar Columbia County, Washington County communities in varying populations, but surrounding that of Scappoose that are similar to this.
She's saying communities that are of like size to Scappoose. We're not talking about Hillsborough
Right.
or
Or
Portland.
Portland.
Not talking
Don't talk about Portland.
Michael, how many people are in Forest Grove? Forest Grove is really big. St. Helens is
Forest-
4,000 bigger.
Forest Grove is about 25,000 population.
That was our comparison.
Well, I can't, did I give you Forest Grove? I'm trying to remember. North
I don't-
Plains is.
I don't know that you
4,000.
did. I know you did North Plains
Well, I can
and
tell you what, I think the standard size in Forest Grove was 4,000 square feet. Renaissance Homes, I think everybody's heard of
Yeah.
Renaissance Home. They were building huge homes. They were selling for $500,000 on 4,000 square foot lots.
I'm glad they're affordable.
So-
And
Good
no,
housing.
we're talking
This is
we're
not
talking
single-family
about
detached,
apartments
but
here.
Yeah.
not,
We're
not
not
single
talking
family.
about single family detached.
Size a lot doesn't necessarily mean affordable.
It's,
No, it certainly
yeah,
doesn't.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely doesn't. But there is some correlation.
I mean, it's a difficult argument.
It is a difficult argument, but we're talking about middle housing here and multifamily housing. If you want us to bring back some specific comparisons to cities that are in the under 10,000, why don't we do that separately?
Jeanette?
Would it be possible when you come back with these numbers, because I'm not a builder, and so what these lots would look like and what type of development? Like you guys are talking about it, or we have examples. I'm a visual person, so would you be able to show something visually, what that would look like?
Yes, we can bring back some pictures.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's too much to ask, but that would be great. Thank you.
I think we'll focus on bringing back pictures related to the A1, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Anything help?
Sorry?
Pictures are tough to see because you know, they're all designed differently
Mhm.
with the exterior. So
I was thinking about
keep
what
that in mind.
I was thinking about what Pat said, and I think I agree. On the A1, we can go with the higher density, from my opinion. I was thinking about the candle, and
Mhm.
Lori, correct me if I'm wrong. It's about 2.5 acres, right? Aaron,
I should have pulled that.
1.92 acres.
and there's 80 units. Right now, they're at.
Yeah.
Well, that's they're running at about they're going.
A little over 40 units per acre.
Yeah, but I was thinking
I
of,
thought it was a little less. Okay.
so they're running at 1,000 square feet, so it'd be less density than the candle, a
Mhm.
lot less actually. So, because that's a different zoning, because we're back
Right.
to EC,
Right.
it allows for even higher density than A1.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I think that a lot more candles probably wouldn't be a good attribute for this town, but that is actually, even at the lower number, it's still significantly less than the candle.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think it's fine to get more information, but probably not worth the fight.
So what I'm going to suggest we do is we bring back some revisions to this. We bring back the other information that you asked for. I don't know if we will have to talk about when we're going to city council.
Yeah.
I'm trying to not put city council in front of your discussions. But I don't want to delay going to city council too much. So
There's another question online.
I'm sorry.
too.
Debbie?
Yeah, the hand was not raised anymore. So go ahead, continue, Beth.
So
Kim, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I guess next time you run these numbers, would it also be possible to see how those changes translate to increased housing potentially, right? So we're looking at about a 15% lot size reduction. That can't just automatically translate to 15%.
no,
increase.
no. What it'll be considerably less than that because you know, not all parcels are large enough that suddenly you can get twice the housing on them. So I will attempt to. That's honestly one of the things I've been a little bit concerned about because the buildable lands inventory was done by somebody who wasn't us. And so looking at all of that data, I will attempt to do that though.
Okay, yeah, because I think it would be helpful because as we, consider these trade-offs, what are we actually gaining?
Sure.
Debbie?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just, one thing that struck with me was that you said the city doesn't have much A1 housing. So if you're not planning on rezoning into any more A1 housing, maybe give us your land use efficiency standard of bringing the minimum lot size down, the before and after, like right now, without any zoning changes, how many maximum units you would have in your existing A1 versus with your decrease in minimum lot sizes, after, since you don't have that much land, it would be good to see how much your increase in housing is happening with your land use efficiency measures.
And also consider that in the future, if the city rezones land to A1 or zones new land for A1, then these standards would apply.
Yeah, because I think right now, if the city doesn't have that much A1 housing, and then the reason why you're not asking for more A1 housing, because I mean, it seems like you want to focus all your high density there in the A1, and if your current needs will allow you to maximize that, that's one thing. But then I don't know. That's just
a lot of the multifamily housing is going into EC at this point. So
okay,
it's not going into A1.
I think it'll continue to unless the code is.
Okay.
And unless you have a lot more A1 zone land in good places. So
Well, I mean, the EC land, rents you can get off EC is literally double what you can get off residential. So somebody would be almost crazy to build commercial to build residential.
Or opposite.
Or you could do potentially office on the first floor.
Right.
But even that still problematic because the cost is so high now that the real money is going to be in the
So can I suggest that we move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. And we have about 20 minutes. So if we can take 10 minutes to go through these study areas, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think we can do that. So I'm going to build on this over time, because this information doesn't necessarily come really easily to people. So Christine, this is for you. Are you repeating this more than once? I'm just teasing you. All right. So in doing the urban growth boundary expansion, or establishing urban reserves, we know how much land we're talking about. And so we know how much land we're looking for UGB expansion. We know how much land we're looking for urban reserves. So the first thing we do is we look all around your urban growth boundary, by a half mile, and that's that solid cloud-like thing around your urban growth boundary, the solid line. So we have to look at all land within that 1/2 mile. And then we look for what's called exceptions areas that are up to a mile away. And that's the dotted line. And so you'll notice that your dotted line gets you into Multnomah County. And I don't think anybody wants to go to Multnomah County at this point. But we have to consider the exceptions areas up to a mile away. Doesn't mean we have to bring them in, but we have to consider them. And so exceptions areas are things that are in county zoning, including rural residential, single family residential, that's a county zone, marine commercial, community service, and then there's some other zones that are considered exception zones. And those are shown in the tan color, sort of yellowish, brownish color, light brown. The farm and forest soils, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, are shown in the brown color. So then if we go to the next slide. So we've looked a half mile and a mile around the city. We want to know where there are constraints. These are the same constraints that we would have used in the buildable lands inventory. So your FEMA floodway and your floodplains, your areas that are high or very high susceptibility to landslides, the places where you have slopes greater than 25%, and wetlands, whether that was considered a constraint in your buildable lands inventory or not. I think we want to know where the wetlands are. For the most part, maybe leaving wetlands aside, but certainly the other constraints, we want to avoid bringing land in that has a bunch of constraints on it, because you can't build housing on steep slopes. You don't really want to build housing where you've got a high susceptibility to landslide. You also don't want to build commercial in those areas either. So the areas that are colored on this map that are either in blue or light blue or, I don't know, orangey yellow or red, those are all areas that we're going to want to avoid. We're going to put those in gray in a moment or two. Next slide.
Just really quick. So how are we treating wetlands? Are they constrained land?
Yeah, it'll show as constraints. Yeah.
Not looking at orange.
Anything with colors on it.
We're not looking at areas that are in constraints. Yes. So here what we've got is a map that goes and it shows a little bit more detail than our first map. It shows you where you've got the exception zoning. It shows you where you've got high value farmland and where you've got low value farmland. So you've got a brown that reminds me of dark chocolate and a brown that reminds me of milk chocolate. I'm sorry. For farmland. And so here I apologize here, but I'm going to quote you some Oregon regulations. So the Oregon Administrative Rule 660-0024-0067 says that the following is the priority for inclusion of land in an urban growth boundary. This means this is the first priority, is the things you have to look at first. First priority is urban reserve. You don't have any urban reserves. Second priority is exceptions land. You've got tons of exceptions land. And then also non-resource land, which I don't see any non-resource land here. So you don't have any urban reserves or non-resource land, but you have plenty of exceptions areas. So we have to first go through those exceptions areas, the areas that are in the tan color. and figure out how much land we'd be talking about in those areas before we're looking at the browns.
You
So
can't hear-
yellowish.
Thing that looks like yellow.
If somebody's talking, we can't hear.
Oh, Beth is just pointing to the screen. Just going over the map.
How much land is in the exception areas that are in that first half-mile belt? You haven't, okay.
Because we're going to get to the way more than Scappoose is going to need over the next 50 years or 100
Even in the
years.
first line, without getting to the second?
Yep. There's hundreds of acres, thousands of acres there.
Okay, so there's just a ton of land.
Oh, yeah. But next, we're going to go to the next slide. And
These go so fast. Is that the correct one?
go
back.
Okay, so yes, go to this slide. Go to the next slide.
Oh, we didn't
feel
do
like
this one
I've
yet.
missed a
We
slide.
didn't do this one yet.
Yeah.
I'll go
I
back.
haven't seen this before.
You were just going over this one. Priority for inclusion.
I feel like I've missed a slide.
I'll go back. Constraints.
Constraints, next one.
So this was the beginning. We did this one.
Uh-huh. Constraints, next one. Next one.
Nope. I went too far. This thing is so touchy. We did this one.
Yeah.
So this is the one we are on now.
They're misordered.
Oh, are they? Okay.
And I'd like you to go one more.
Okay, sure. And then we can, there you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
So here we're only showing the exceptions areas. And of course, now I'm using a different color. I apologize for my constraints. Now my constraints are kind of brown, but the areas that are that yellow color that don't have constraints over them, that's what we're thinking about. And so, NJ, can I borrow your mouse? I think I probably need to take this away. Wheel. So there we go. So these areas here that are exceptions without constraints on them, this area here that is exceptions without constraints on it, this little area up here that's exceptions without constraints on it, this pathetic, sad little thing that's got a little tiny, what do you call it, cherry stem. I think there's some areas over here I can't quite tell because I'm too far away. But these are the ones that we're really going to be talking about. The ones within the half mile where you don't have constraints. That's going to be more than 300 acres. And I expect that one at the south, and then some of the ones that are a little unconstrained over to the northwest are going to be some of the main areas we're talking about. So that's the thinking that goes into this. We'll be looking at exceptions areas, and we'll be looking at the ones that are less constrained. And then eventually, we'll be choosing between these exceptions areas based on the what's called the Goal 14 criteria. They are shown up here, like efficient accommodation of identified land need, orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services, comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences, and compatibility of proposed urban uses with nearby agricultural and forest activities. So that's how we'll choose among the unconstrained exceptions areas.
Question, on the south side, you have a large area of exception area. A good chunk of that is a subdivision. So would the city bring in a subdivision that already has houses on it with the idea that it would become more dense if it was in the city?
City could be required to bring in a subdivision, but in terms of capacity, it would be considered depending on how much it's built out. It would
Well
be
built out.
okay. Let's just say it's built out and it's built out to like 10,000 square foot lots.
Okay.
So that would have essentially, if the city had to bring it in, that would essentially be considered to have zero capacity. So there are some situations in which you might want to bring in an area that is already built out, but say adjacent to the urban growth boundary, where you've got failing septic tanks, for instance. And that ends up being really, it doesn't count against your UGB expansion for how much land, but that ends up being a different sort of argument, and a public safety argument.
We don't know at this point what the acreage is in that half-mile bait.
Nope.
Circle that. So we don't even know how much of it's.
Nope. That's the next step.
Okay.
We'll be setting up study areas. Each study area will be 100 acres or less. That's the requirements. And so we'll be looking at some of them, like the one I pointed to up north, where you've got a cherry stem. It comes off of the industrial land. That one will be considered, and I believe, for instance, that one may well be wiped away because it's not good urban form to have a cherry stem, and then a lollipop on top of your cherry stem, and providing services to that is going to be more expensive. Just like there are some areas that say on the southwest side of the city where providing services are already really expensive. Once we get to looking at costs of that, I believe that some of those areas may well prove very costly to serve. And that's our next couple of steps. So I'll be repeating this a little bit better next time.
Michael?
I guess I look at this map and to me, one of the most prime ideal locations for commercial is on the southeast side right there that's in white. So I guess that assumes that it's not being considered.
Yeah, because that's all high value farmland.
And I would say back at you about the high farmland that most of this is class 3 soil, and you need to explain to me, why is it okay for the people in North Plains to build on better farmland than we have anywhere in this county? And yet, I mean, if you applied a common sense to this map, you would, I mean, the obvious place for commercial is right there. The stuff on the left-hand side there is all hilly, and those people fought tooth and nail to, last time the city talked about bringing it in urban growth boundaries. So I don't think it's realistic in housing to me up in the northwest corner up there in some of that white area. That's, again, marginal farmland, I would call it. Makes the most sense. So, I mean, if community of North Plains can do it and they're building homes, and they're a far smaller community than us, I don't understand. I mean, they're just over the hill. I don't know why we can't.
I expect North Plains has considerably less exceptions area around it. Heather actually does planning for North Plains.
I'm actually on the UGB expansion project. So in North Plains, it's true they have very few exception lands. So that first category, there's not much to look at. In the second category, when we start looking at, well, North Plains is surrounded by undesignated land. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Grand Bargain and with the.
I was part of the Grand Bargain.
So we don't have any urban reserves around the city of North Plains, but we do have a few exception lands. And then what we looked at as our study area was considered undesignated. So that was part of the Grand Bargain to leave that undesignated. So there is basically high value farmland is where North Plains can expand. Their adopted urban economic opportunities analysis showed a deficit of about 700 acres of employment land. So they are looking for an 850 acre UGB expansion to accommodate residential and employment land need.
How big?
850 acres.
You just made my point. I mean, we're just right over the hill, and this farmland isn't as good as the.
So I had a question.
So I struggle with it.
There was a parcel that's about 20 acres. It's off Halflick on the east side, kind of past Wana down there, kind of not just as you get off the highway. You have to go a little bit further back. That, if I remember correctly, was not in a floodplain, and it was not highly productive farmland. And that parcel almost made it last time, but didn't make it. we do need some space for some big box stores, and to get a big box store or even another supermarket, we need a piece of flat land near the highway. It's going to have to be flat and it's going to have to be near the highway. So that parcel, I would think, would be an excellent parcel for that. Unfortunately, the owners planted nursery stock on it. So the visual right now is that it's highly productive farmland. But the soil class there is not, I'm thinking it's class 3, Mike. And that's like 20 acres. And I think it's owned by the Havlicks, but I'm not positive. But that would be a parcel that would be perfect for a big box store. And I'd like to see something somewhere where we can have dreams of a Home Depot or the equivalent at some point in the future. No, we're not getting it now or today. We're talking out of ways.
So for urban growth boundary expansion, you can make for economic development concerns, you can make site needs arguments. I'm not sure. I don't want to commit any direction here. You cannot make that for urban reserves. You absolutely cannot make that kind of argument for urban reserves. A lot of this is a risk judgment. How much is the city willing to risk going to court over? And so there'll be a point here as we're going through this where we're talking to the city attorney and asking various questions. I can see what we've got in our inventory of land and in our areas that is relatively flat near the highway, so just adjacent to the highway essentially. But this is one of those areas where the city certainly runs the risk of ending up with somebody remanding or challenging the analysis. So I agree with you. It's not common sense. This is certainly Oregon's system.
I think we need to plan on it happening.
And on which
Not
happening,
getting
I'm sorry.
challenged.
Oh,
pretty
much.
I mean,
Well, I hope not.
Well,
And
I think it's
I would say this is one of those things that I would really look to the city council for some guidance on, and your city attorney, because we're not attorneys. So if the city's goals are such that we're looking at something that is, beyond the priority scheme, then I think we need to talk about what that means and whether the city is likely to be victorious with that, and what the city council's tolerance for risk is there.
okay. We have a couple minutes here.
Yes.
So do you want to wrap up, Beth?
Well, I know. I was looking to see if there's anybody behind us. I think that is probably our last slide, just about. Will you tick through? Yep. Here we go. So we're going to continue to work on the land use code changes. We'll bring you back the information that we said today that we'd bring you back. We're going to continue to work on urban growth boundary and urban reserve analysis. Hopefully pin down those last pieces that are unknown about the other land needs. When we come back and tell you some of the urban growth boundary expansion areas, we'll try to have some information for you about parcel size and that kind of thing. See if we're looking at any areas that may well meet the need you're talking about there, Brian. We'll be starting the comprehensive plan updates, and our next meeting is August 1st.
Yep.
Wonderful. Then look at the next meetings on the schedule here. It's September 12th after the August 1st, September 12th, October 24th, November 28th. Please put that on your calendars. That will be, sounds like fun.
I'll be envious of you.
And I also want to say thank you to Lori and Beth and also Heather. Heather, you're very articulate tonight. We really appreciate your presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I will be back.
She will be.
And I'll
say no
present some
quite a
of the
bit.
more.
Do say no quite a bit.
I'm sorry. I don't think of it as no. Think of it as here's an idea that you can.
She does it with a smile.
It is my job to provide you with what the state says. Yeah. So I will wear that, dunce cap.
Yep.
But I will try to put some of the more discussion heavy items a little further in and not just spring them on you next time like I did tonight.
The red items,
Yes.
all the red.
The red line is.
Yes.
And then also
You went through
appreciate, I appreciate everyone in this room because tonight was a really beautiful night and coming back and joining this committee. And the good thing about tonight is that Scappoose won 6-4 in baseball and they're going
Oh,
to state championship.
Wow.
The state championship is a Saturday. I'm not sure what time, but it's probably in Volcano Stadium. The girls lost the softball, so they're not going to the state championship, but the boys won tonight, just right down the street. So I was there.
Awesome.
That's why I have hat hair tonight because I was down there with my baseball hat on before the meeting. But anyway, thank you everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.